Welcome to the November 27th meeting of the Kiwanis Club of Birmingham. Please stand as I invite Jay Patton to the podium to offer the invocation and lead us in the pledge of allegiance.
Thank you, President Scott. As we come post-Thanksgiving and we think about National Security Day, I think it's appropriate we think of the people who protect our country in uniform, but also out of uniform. As we'll learn today, this protection has become more and more technical. We rely on diplomats, scientists, bureaucrats, analysts throughout our national security establishment. So as we give our prayer today, let's think about all those people who help keep us safe. And in honor of our speaker's Naval Academy time, and I'm not going to say anything about Army Navy, not going to do it, show a little bit of class today. But I ask you if you would please bow your heads as I read for us as our invocation, the Midshipman Prayer. Almighty God, whose way is in the sea, whose paths are in the great waters, whose command is over all, and whose love never faileth, let me be aware of thy presence and obedient to thy will. Keep me true to my best self, guarding me against dishonesty in purpose and in deed, and helping me so to live that I can stand unashamed and unafraid before my shipmates, my loved ones, and thee. Protect those in whose love I live. Give me the will to do my best and to accept my share of responsibilities with a strong heart and a cheerful mind. Make me considerate of those entrusted to my leadership and faithful to the duties my country has entrusted in me. Let my uniform remind me daily of the traditions of the service of which I am a part. If I am inclined to doubt, steady my faith. If I am tempted, make me strong to resist. If I should miss the mark, give me courage to try again. Guide me with the light of truth and give me strength to faithfully serve thee now and always. Amen. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jay, for that invitation. And Jim Knowles wants to see you afterwards. West Point guy, right? Jim Knowles, aren't you up there? Right? Okay, just making sure. Picking up on Jim Knowles. Okay, with that, I'd like to invite Club Secretary J.W. Carpenter to come up for announcements and introduction of guests.
Hello, everyone. So we have a few announcements this week, and I can get my first slide. So I don't know, is Larry here? Of course, I finally say something nice about someone and they're not here. Larry Thornton had a great piece about him in the Birmingham Business Journal. For those of you that don't know, Kiwanis produces great authors, and Larry's book is coming out very soon. Please pick it up. His life story is just phenomenal, and he's a great credit to our club and our community. So please check out this article and his book when it comes out. Congratulations to Larry. Birmingham Business Hall of Fame, it's now an evening event. Nominations open in December. We would love for you to submit nominations. Please do so directly to the club or just anyone you see up here, and we'll get it to the club. And we would love to have a great list of nominees every year. It's exciting to see who gets chosen. So this is my second consecutive week saying something nice about Jim Knowles, breaking my personal record. And tonight at Alabama Booksmith, owned by the great Jay Reese, Jim is going to be talking about his book. And I'm sure he'll sign the book, especially if you buy the book. And it's a great gift for upcoming holidays. It's a great thing for you to read as well. So please show up tonight. If you don't show up tonight, I'm sure there'll be plenty of signed copies. And I think Jim's got a bunch in the back of his car too, so you can corner him and get him there. But it's a really tremendous thing, and excited to read it. And then finally, the long anticipated, next week, December 6th, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Museum of Art. I've been told to stress that the dress is business casual, so please just dress appropriately. And it should be a ton of fun, but it's only going to be fun if you come, so please sign up in the hallway or RSVP to the club. Bring guests, and looking forward to seeing everybody there. So we have a lot of guests this week. And we want to make sure that we give as much time to the speaker, who I know I'm really excited to hear, and judging by the crowd, you're really excited to hear. So I just ask, if you are a guest or you are a host of a guest, if you could please stand up. You guys know the drill. All right, I turn it over to President Scott.
Thank you, JW. It's great to see such an awesome crowd here today. And thanks to all our guests for being with us. To hear from Bud McFarlane, I had the opportunity to join Bud and some others for dinner last night, and we're in for a real treat today. Really fascinating discussion. Also, big thanks to Ed Rao for diligently pursuing Bud and finally landing him and getting him to come and join us today. So excited. But before we get to our speaker, for the third week in a row, we have a new member introduction. And it's great to see so much activity on the new member front. Scott Russell and your committee. So I would like to call Tracy Moran Adams to the podium to introduce new member Anne Marie Stanford.
Thank you, President Scott. Fellow Kiwanians, I have the distinct privilege to introduce the newest member of the Birmingham Kiwanis Club, Anne Marie Stanford, former member of the Homewood Mountain Brook Kiwanis Club. Anne Marie is a native of Mandeville, Jamaica, the capital and largest town of the parish of Manchester, Jamaica. She is married to Ronald Stanford and has 3 children, Morgan, Nia, and Matthew. Anne Marie earned her BS degree in mathematics from the historic Spelman College, Atlanta, Georgia. She also holds an MS degree in engineering management from the University of Dayton in Dayton, Ohio. Professionally, she serves as Director of Supply Chain Projects and Supplier Diversity for Spire, formerly Allegasco. And prior to joining Allegasco Spire, Anne Marie held a 17-year career in the automotive industry as manager of production control and logistics for a Tier 1 supplier to Mercedes-Benz US International. I personally got to know her through her many civic, leadership, and charitable passions. She serves on many boards, including Momentum Leaders, Vulcan Parks, and the City of Hoover's Industrial Development Board. In her spare time, she loves to provide mentorship and sponsorship to aspiring youth and enjoys being outdoors, traveling, reading, and just spending quality time with her lovely family. Along with fellow Kiwanians Terry Smiley and Victor Brown, I am happy to present Anne Marie Stanford to the club.
Welcome, Anne Marie. Glad you joined the club and hope you'll join the greeting committee out front and introduce yourself to the members so they can get to know you and you can get to know them. And also consider joining one of our Kiwanis committees as another way to get engaged. So thank you. Okay, so one more item to cover before we get to our speaker. I would now like to call Tom Thayer to the podium for an update on our Vulcan Centennial Park project. Tom?
Yes. Once you hear from me, I'm not sure you're going to be clapping. This presentation is primarily for the 78 new Kiwanis members who have joined us since we first rolled out the Kiwanis Centennial Park project 2 years ago in November of 2016. It seems like an eternity but it was only 2 years ago. But everyone else needs to pay attention too. So, as for the new members, as you may or may not know, every year Rotary has a foundation fundraising drive about this time of year, and the Quarterback Club raises money for the Crippled Children's Foundation. So you new members may be asking yourself, why doesn't Kiwanis have an annual fundraising drive for its foundation to enable it to do more good for the community, especially since it does a lot more good than both Rotary and the Quarterback Club? Well, just to keep you informed, the club this time of year has historically always had a fundraising drive for its foundation, which enables it to do good things in the community. And they've always done it about this time of year. They plan to get back to it in the year 2021. But for our Kiwanis Centennial Project, we asked all the existing members to make a 5-year pledge. And in response to those pledges, we suspended our annual campaign drive for 5 years, from 2016 to 2020, of which you new members have been a beneficiary. And in doing so, this club itself raised $1.6 million. Something that's never been done in the history of the club before. But you new members have gotten a free ride on that, because you joined the club after the fundraising drive was finished. Back to this point in a minute. So, quick summary for the new members who may not be aware here. I think this works like this. There was a $5.8 million transformational project for the city of Birmingham. It was a historic expansion because, as everyone knows, we put Vulcan up on the top of Red Mountain to begin with in 1936. We built a 2-mile trail connecting the city, connecting from all the way from Green Springs to Vulcan itself, and preserved the north face of Red Mountain for our children and grandchildren. And since we opened in April, we've had over 30,000 users on the trail, making it what I claim to be a lot more used than Rotary Trail. As you know, there's a dynamic light show, Transforming the Sky, which has become really impressive now since the time change, has it coming on at 5 o'clock or earlier. We have light shows set to music. Can I run that from here? Every weekend they run that light show, and then another one with Tuxedo Junction at the park with music to that. And we're about to add a fantastic Hanukkah and Christmas light to music show as well. So it'll be a prominent part of the Christmas part of Birmingham. Amazingly enough, you get kind of lucky on these things sometimes. This has truly been an award-winning project. Our club was awarded the Vulcan Game Changer Award for the project in the city. It was there's goofy me accepting the award. It was just last week, 2 weeks ago, the National Society of Fundraising Professionals awarded our Kiwanis Club the Outstanding Charitable Organization of the Year. So that was a nice award. Then our park, of course, was built by Brian Bart here, who guided us through it. And Brian and the Brass and Gory team is being awarded the Alabama Builders and Contractors Excellence in Construction Award this Thursday night, I think, which is a really nice award for them, which we'll glom onto. It's had an amazing community impact. It's connecting the north sides, connects to Birmingham, and it's about to connect the south side of Red Mountain to the north side of Red Mountain. It's already catalyzing change to 5 Point South Corridor. There's already engineering plans, and I hope money in the works to change that sort of dysfunctional part of, I guess it's 21st, 19th, I don't know what street it is. It goes over, right over Vulcan. I don't think anybody knows what the name of that street is. Everybody knows it's dysfunctional. But that's the project to be fixed, and the plan to be fixed. And I think we can take credit for inspiring that change and hurrying it up. There's a renewed civic vitality around Vulcan, and we've increased foot traffic. I hope to Vulcan to help the park remain on its feet financially. As you will notice as you go home from downtown, Vulcan is now the single most prominent part of Birmingham's nighttime skyline. If you're flying in on an airplane, look out and look at it. It's amazing. It stands out as the thing that comes to your attention when you look at the city of Birmingham at night. And hopefully with this addition of the Hanukkah and the Christmas light shows, it'll become even more prominent. I think this was read to y'all a week or two ago. Some of you may have missed it. This was a spontaneous email we got from a nurse at Children's Hospital who emailed to the Vulcan Park. As I sit here writing this email, I'm watching Vulcan and the amazing Halloween light show being presented. I want all of you and all the staff at Vulcan Park to know how much the children in our hospital enjoy it. Not all the children are well enough to get to the windows, but please know that the ones who can love it. The light shows bring a bright spot to an otherwise not so bright time in the lives of our patients and families. I want all of you to know that your efforts are not unnoticed. Wow, pretty amazing stuff. I made 5 years of my time worthwhile. So, where do we go from here? So again, we're sharing our history, and this is the major part. It's a $5.8 million project, and Enid Camp and Kip Porter and Nelson Bean have already raised $5.15 million. And we only need another $650,000 to raise, which is a pretty amazing feat, which they should be very proud. We should be very proud of them. And so we're going to ask from the new members who were not here at the original fundraising drive to please, and we'll put this out in an email and on a letter, please consider a 3-year pledge from the new members who've not yet supported the project to help us defray this cost. We're not seeking to gain all $650,000 from this. We've got several grant proposals out and other ideas to close it out. But it sure would be nice if we could raise some more money from the new members who hadn't supported it yet. And that also applies to some of the old members who've not supported it yet. So now's the time to get your pledge in and get on Santa's good list. So, and I've been approached by several members spontaneously who said people who gave the first time, who said they would be willing to give again. So if you feel so inclined, we're not asking you to give again, but if you feel so inclined to give again to help us bring this to a close, we really appreciated this. And we'll follow up again with a letter and pledge card, but please give generously and help us close this project out. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to your team's leadership on all this. Really fantastic. All right, let's do introductions so we can get to our speaker. Tracy Moran Adams, Senior EVP, Chief Community Development and Corporate Social Responsibility Officer, Renaissance Bank, Kiwanis since 2009. Anne Marie Stanford, who was just introduced by Tracy. Tom Thayer, who we just heard from, distinguished past president of our club, attorney, shareholder, Maynard, Cooper, and Gale, Kiwanis since 2001. J.W. Carpenter, executive director, Birmingham Education Foundation, Kiwanis since 2013. Jay Patton, Jay, thanks again for that invitation. Attorney, shareholder, Ogletree Deacons, Kiwanis since 2004. Dave Carter, distinguished past president of our club, retired president, Vulcan Lands, Inc., Kiwanis since 1977. And finally, John Saxon, distinguished past secretary, attorney partner, John D. Saxon, PC, Kiwanis since 1994. And John has the honor of introducing our speaker. Please join me in recognizing the head table.
I've been fortunate to know our speaker for more than 2 decades. I've been able to introduce him speaking events in Washington and served together on the board of the White House Fellows Alumni Association. So I'm honored to have been asked last week to introduce Bud McFarlane. Bud served at the highest levels of government, and I want to do this quickly, just a little short walk through history. But we've got 3 quick pictures if we can look at them. The first picture shows a very young Bud McFarlane with Henry Kissinger and Brent Scowcroft, both of whom were mentors and lifelong friends of his. Next picture, you can see Bud with Secretary of State George Shultz and President Reagan on Air Force One. Next picture, you see Bud in the Oval Office with President Reagan and President Bush. Now, not only did he serve at the highest levels in Washington, he was born in Washington. His father was a Democratic congressman from Texas, his 13th congressional district, served from 33 to 39 during the New Deal period. In the summer of 1937, when Congress was still in session, Bud was born in Washington. He followed 2 other members of his family by going to the Naval Academy, from which he graduated in 1959. He served 2 combat tours in Vietnam. He commanded an artillery battery of Marines that were part of the first wave of combat forces that landed in Da Nang in 1965. He went back in 1967, where he was a regimental field fire support coordinator for the 3rd Marine Division along the DMZ during the Tet Offensive. In between, he had gone to the Institute of International Studies in Geneva and gotten a master's degree in strategic studies. He became a White House fellow in 1971. He served at the White House in the Office of Congressional Liaison. He came to the attention of one Henry Kissinger. He then became Dr. Kissinger's military assistant. 1976, Gerald Ford made him special assistant for national security affairs. He then went to the Hill in 1979, worked for Senator John Tyler of Texas to help staff the Senate on the SALT II treaty confirmation process. When Ronald Reagan was elected president, Reagan became the 3rd president he would serve. First as counselor at the State Department, then he became Deputy National Security Advisor at the White House. He was Special Representative for the Middle East, and then in 1983 he became National Security Advisor. As National Security Advisor, Bud was one of the principal architects of the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, or Star Wars. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the Reagan administration's commitment to spend that money, which the Soviets quickly learned they could not match, led to the Berlin Wall coming down, Warsaw Pact nations basically being liberated, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and the end of the Cold War. And Bud, our country owes you a big debt of gratitude for that service. Very briefly, after he retired from the military as a lieutenant colonel and left government service, he then went to work he became CEO of McFarlane and Associates, worked on energy initiatives in underdeveloped countries, trying to create nuclear power plants that were green and to use alternative sources of energy. We're going to hear some about that. Final thing I will say, and we've got one final picture. I was fortunate to be in Washington last month when the White House Fellows Alumni gave Bud its basically Lifetime Achievement Award, the Legacy of Leadership Award. Not many of those have been given out, and he joins the ranks of people like former Secretary of State Colin Powell and former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, General Wesley Clark. West Point now, Jay. It is my distinct honor to introduce you to the man who was the National Security Advisor to our 40th President, and my friend, Bud McFarlane.
John, Scott, each of you who have come today, I humble truly by your invitation to come here today, should include the special notice that was expressed in the invocation and prayer, the use of midshipman prayer that goes back for me about 60 years. I don't want to get too carried away about how blessed all midshipmen are. I should add, to be truth in advertising, that prayer always ended at the end by a hearty Pete Army. I was asked to come today to offer a kind of tour of the horizon from Europe to Asia to the Middle East, matters threatening American interests and stability throughout the world, and to try to do that in about 10 minutes. And I said I can't do that. But I will do my best. I know you have other things to do, and I'll try to be brief and to take your questions at the end of it. In trying to summarize the threats to stability in those three continents, to start with Europe, the European Union, an inspired idea created about 60 years ago by two gentlemen, both French, Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman. As you know, the European Union was born in the wake of World War II and was driven by the concept that if you so intermingle the economies, relationships between defeated, destroyed countries in the heart of Western Europe, made them so inextricably linked by trade across borders and through the integration of supply chains, that it would be impossible for them to go to conflict again. Simply stated, if their own self-interest was caught up in their livelihoods, in these relationships from Germany to surrounding countries in France, Italy, and beyond, then it would make no sense. Clearly, the costs and damage and losses of conflict would be far greater than any conceivable concept of gain. In the beginning, the common market involved only a few countries, a half dozen. Each of these countries had suffered terrible losses and had special incentives to work together, memories and devastation that brought them closer together to make sure that didn't happen again. And in the beginning, they were able to overcome the predictable disagreements that always happen between trading countries because they had memories. They had incentives personally to avoid another World War II for sure. But in the beginning, those relatively homogeneous countries, 6 of them, were joined by 22 more. 22 more who were much more culturally diverse, the Scandinavian countries, the Mediterranean countries, and more recently, countries in Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, the Baltics, Bulgaria, and so forth. But all in all, countries with very diverse histories, very different capabilities, and very different standards, whether we talk about the level of the work ethic historically in these diverse countries, accountability, fiscal discipline, and ultimately productivity, which today are very, very different from one of these 28 countries to their neighbors. And for that reason, that diversity and contrast in work ethic and productivity has led to predictable risks, disagreements, and a gradual unraveling process. In short, the severe recession that Europe experienced all across the continent 8 years ago was fairly predictable. And it actually just finally exposed these socio-cultural distinguishing features, one to another, where northern countries differ dramatically from Greece in willingness to pay taxes, for example, but differences which were bound to promote sharp disagreements and inability to maintain the standards that were established by the central government of the European Union in Brussels. Well, I say that this involves a gradual weakening and ultimately potential unraveling of the European Union. However, others legitimately will comment that, well, while those disagreements, those differences truly exist, that there are other factors that have stressed Europe beyond measure. And they cite, for example, the massive influx of refugees immigrating into Europe from the Syrian civil war, more than 400,000 refugees already and continuing. A challenge, certainly to be sure, that would stress any collective community of nations. And yet, challenges and stresses that at another time, in an earlier period, could have been managed. Looking back, for example, to the end of World War II, equivalent challenges were posed, such as European leaders having to deal with shattered economies at the end of World War II, the physical devastation of their infrastructure and virtually leveling cities from Berlin to surrounding capitals throughout Western Europe. And yet, in those days, leaders of those countries stood up. Konrad Adenauer in Germany, de Gaulle, Churchill, able to inspire confidence among their people that they could overcome these losses and shattered economies and to come together under American leadership and to recover in forming such well-known institutions as NATO, Marshall Plan, the Point 4 program, and others proposed by the United States but executed and carried out by remarkable historical leaders in Europe at that time. But today, what are we seeing? What might we expect from the current generation of leaders in Europe? At the end of the Cold War in 1991, most of the leaders in Western Europe, and indeed in the United States, declared what one author termed the end of history. That is, the belief that the United States, primarily, had finally determined the perfect model for governing an industrial society, and that all that was needed was for all nations to adopt democracy and to institute freedom in the marketplace and among individuals under the rule of law, and that would just naturally happen. It had been demonstrated. Surely it would be easily adopted by countries, forgetting that so many countries throughout the world had never experienced democracy or built the institutions or a condition and habit of the rule of law governing the behavior of individuals as well as governments. But neglecting those demands that are placed on any society undergoing such a profound transformation, we deluded ourselves into taking what I would call a peace dividend. We cut our defense budgets here and in Western Europe. We didn't launch training programs for new countries who needed to learn how do you build institutions? How do you establish an acceptance of the rule of law and courts independent and able to assure that internal disagreements and fracturing could be overcome in government in a stable fashion, assured. And in addition, when they're trying to overcome this fairly profound difference between a Poland and France, or a Bulgaria and the United Kingdom, and do that in a time of recession and mass migration from the Middle East, is probably asking too much, but it is reality. And today, the institutions of the European Union are proving more than stressed and probably inadequate to cope with this predictably stressful set of conditions that afflict all of the European Union nowadays. So where's the leadership going to come from to overcome these very severe stresses? Hard to imagine that it's going to come from the traditional leaders. Germany, for example. Germany has had the blessing of stable leadership for more than a decade now, with the leadership of Angela Merkel, who is now leaving the scene, and followed by a relatively untested and inexperienced successor. In the European Union, could it be Great Britain, the United Kingdom? Unlikely. They are indeed leaving the European Union now. What about France? One would have to say that, at best, the current leadership in France is inexperienced, quite youthful. Unemployment right now is inching toward 10% in France. Growth levels are diminishing in France, and President Macron has a current approval rating below 30%. And I must say that it's also equally not plausible that leadership will come from the United States as it did in the wake of World War II. Our country is in a period of nationalist revival, seeking to curtail our involvement overseas and not to take on the burdens of others. In short, Europe, unfortunately, is in for a long and increasingly turbulent decline. Turning to Asia, China, who has amassed enormous amounts of cash, is entering its imperial phase of its history. That's expressed best in what is being called the One Belt, One Road initiative. And this is a plan well developed over the past 6 years by President Xi Jinping to connect China to the rest of the world, physically, financially, involving such massive infrastructure programs as building railroads between Beijing and London, and to every other capital in between, interstate highways, pipelines, and digitally to take Chinese technology and to enable Beijing to be able to influence change rather dramatically, not just by cash alone and investments, but by theft of intellectual property in the US as well as in Europe, but to remain determined to do the best they can to establish influence and ultimately domination throughout Europe and throughout the Middle East. I commend to your attention a current article, however, in the issue of the National Interest, a monthly journal published in Washington, where a man named Gordon Chang declares that as impressive as this imperial policy may seem, that China does have vulnerabilities, notably a mounting debt issue where last year, for example, instead of the 6.5% growth rates in GDP that they publicly claim, China actually had about a 1% growth rate. Such is the obfuscation and misrepresentation of the facts about Chinese power and growth of its economy. Simply stated, if you are running up debts on the public purse far more quickly than you are running up GDP, that won't work. And the level of change and correcting this imbalance is forecast by Gordon Chang and others, economists from Adam Greenspan to those more seasoned than I, say that China is bound to run off a cliff before too long, probably 2 years before China is in deep, deep recession. I should stress, however, that it is a dangerous period of time. China's military has been improved dramatically, and the ability to claim control over the South China Sea is within reach. And its ability to build ports in Sri Lanka and all along the route that they must protect if they are to have energy from the Persian Gulf to fire and fuel their economy. China today is fueling, or trying, to fuel more than 25 million automobiles a year that they produce. Stop and think about that. That's many more than the United States collectively produces, counting all of the foreign manufacturers that are in our country. And so China has to solve the problem. How do you fuel all these vehicles? Currently, they rely upon oil and gas from the Persian Gulf, but of course that has to reach from the Gulf to China through the Straits, and in competition with similar demands being placed on the same source of energy by Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asian countries. In short, a recipe for conflict, clearly. And China is preparing for it by assuring that sea line of communications and those routes from the Strait of Malacca on into Tokyo, Beijing, Seoul, and other capitals is assured by force, if necessary. Look for China, however, in my opinion, to go into deep recession within about 2 years' time. It's not a source of joy. It's a source of anxiety, for indeed President Xi Jinping is driven by a very passionate personal commitment to expanding beyond its borders and establishing a degree of empire with prevailing influence in the Middle East over those sources of energy and ultimately over the markets of Western Europe. As for the Middle East, it has become a cauldron of violence, civil wars ongoing in Syria and in Yemen. And we're also seeing outright aggression being launched, led, funded, and military power underwritten by Iran. Iran is relying primarily upon surrogate forces which they organize and pay for. Hezbollah, of the same Shia sect of Islam, enabling the formation of militias that have given Iran a prevailing influence in their neighbor, Iraq, and now on into Syria and in Lebanon, and it's designed to drive a wedge between the Arab countries of the region. From all of the Gulf Arabs, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the Emirates, Oman, Egypt, Jordan, to be separated from Turkey and to pose an opportunity for Iran to try to establish a dominant role through military power primarily, but also economic influence and an effort to subvert their Sunni brethren from the point of view of spiritual influence. The probability of stability in the Middle East is further worsened by an agreement that our country concluded with Iran about 3 years ago. And that agreement was designed to constrain the growth of what was a very active nuclear weapons program that Iran had been underway for more than 10 years. Well, whatever you may think about that agreement, it was well intended, but it has led to a predictable reaction among the Arab states, and that is simply stated, to have an equivalent capability. That is, to begin to build electric power plants. And they need that, and they're entitled to that. They signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But of course, preventing the diversion of fuel from energy generation to a weapons program is a fairly easy thing to do. It's important that the effort that's underway right now, being led by Saudi Arabia, to commence a massive creation of nuclear power generation doesn't lead to diversion of the fuel during the fuel cycle to the origination of a weapons program. Well, in undertaking that initiative, Saudi Arabia has invited 5 countries to make proposals on what they could do to help. And they've invited Russia, China, France, the South Korean industry, and the United States. We're in a very weak position to compete because our nuclear power industry has atrophied very severely in the last 30 years. We haven't been able to complete a nuclear power plant in 30 years. So what are we going to do? Left to Providence, it's likely, very likely, that Russia or China will win that competition. And when you think beyond generating electricity to how does that impact your relationship with the government of Saudi, Kuwait, Egypt, or Jordan, there are examples from the past, and they're very clear, and that is when you can literally turn the lights out, you gain political influence. And so if Russia or China were to win that competition, countries who were much less demanding on countering the proliferation of nuclear weapons, you have the basis, as Henry Kissinger reacted when we briefed him to this prospect. It's a predictable recipe for mutual assured destruction or a nuclear arms race between the Arab states and Iran within the next 10 years' time. But it doesn't have to happen. Right now, it is very much in question, however, especially given the recent turmoil in our relationship with Saudi Arabia. After a brutal, unconscionable murder, there's has captured headlines and called into question the leadership of Saudi Arabia. We have to ask ourselves, how in the world can you at once condemn, punish, and urge toward more predictable exercise of a rule of law worthy of the name, and getting on with two promising features of the contemporary Middle East? And the first one I'll cite is hard to understand, but it is that Saudi Arabia is going to run out of oil. No one can possibly imagine that. And yet there's been about a battalion of American consultants, terrific people from Texas A&M and the McKinsey Company, that have been convincing Saudi Arabia that indeed in about 2038 you're going to become an importer of oil. Well, what does that mean? It means that you've got to become a normal country. Normal in the sense that you do what other countries do. You have to learn things like farming, manufacturing, mining, and then the service industries that we all know very well: housing, healthcare, education, law enforcement, and things that have never been done effectively in these countries. The kind of things, the transformative things, the industrialization of a region that can either be done by Russia or China or the United States of America. And so our country is facing a set of challenges that contrast the yielding of 70 years of responsibility on our part for the security of the region to countries like Russia or China, or both, whose personal agendas, in the case of China, for empire, for this Russia, and having a dominant influence on the price of oil, the stakes are very high. And it's going to take enlightened leadership in our country to be able to overcome the current justified outrage we are feeling towards Saudi Arabia, and to be able to coach this very young, aspiring monarch into sobriety and serious purpose in undertaking this transformation of this country here in the next 20 years' time. As stressful as that process is bound to be, there are glimmers of hope. We are hearing from that same Saudi leader and others, from the King of Jordan to the President of Egypt, calls for fundamental change in Islam, in the doctrine of both Sunni and Shia spiritual faith, away from the radical apocalyptic notion of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and to a more tolerant approach, acknowledging the legitimacy of other faiths from both Judeo-Christian and other Buddhist or remote practices. Leadership. Leadership needed in each of these places. Leadership born of knowledge and experience. Leadership that can rise to the occasion and have not just knowledge and experience overnight, but to be able to inspire confidence that you understand as a leader of Egypt or Saudi Arabia what the challenges you are facing involve. To bring together the resources, both human and material, to fashion sound policies, be it in foreign or domestic areas. To inspire confidence that you know what you're doing, that you have a plan, and you're going to execute the plan successfully. Tall order, very tall order. My own experience and knowledge of these individuals is just out of the question, absent American leadership. In the past, these were the kinds of challenges that leaders in Europe and Asia and the Middle East saw coming. And in Washington, had the competence, knowledge, experience to fashion strategies and policies that enabled us in the past 70 years to work with loyal allies and manage to have stable economies, capable militaries, and peace. Leadership, statesmanship, vision. Where has it gone? Today here at home, the atrophy of our institutions, our political parties, higher education are dissuading otherwise qualified young Americans from taking the risk of public service. Can anybody in this room name 3 senators or members of the House who could hold a candle to those from the past, the Democrats, Scoop Jackson, Sam Nunn, or Republicans, John McCain, Dick Lugar? Why not? What is holding Generation X and millennials back from coming forward and seeking office? Most, when asked, say it's too risky. That even if elected, it's too difficult to get anything done for several years. It's too expensive. And that the rules of the House and the Senate are too implacably resistant to change and reform. But what has happened to our ability to raise new generations? Leaders who are willing to come forward into public service. I think that one of the answers lies in this room. It's been 30 years since I was last in Birmingham, and I must tell you, in just 24 hours, I've been terribly impressed by the quality of leadership that is expressed not just at this head table, but every table here, from people who have stepped up, have created worthy projects that have gotten phenomenal results in education, have attracted investment and nurtured industries, particularly healthcare, but also housing, law enforcement, manufacturing, that is setting a standard for our entire country. And you're doing it in behalf of the quality of life, but also the quality of education, and are nurturing the next generation of kids through your own book program, your engagement, your mentoring, the thousands of things and hours that each of you have committed out of your own volition to do in Birmingham. This is a vibrant community. You ought to be terribly proud of what you have here in Birmingham. And I say that from only 24 hours of listening to Ed Rao. But I encourage you, and you need no words from me, to continue this tradition of service, of identifying a problem and coming together in groups just like you are today to fashion solutions, raise the money, provide the leadership, and get it done. I can't tell you how much I admire what you have done and the established habits and processes that make clear that you're going to keep doing it. Our country is in a very difficult moment. Difficult to take on the responsibilities that we must, because there is no alternative to the United States. I've covered a few of the lowlights of Europe's decline, of Asian ambition for empire, of disarray and a desperate need for leadership in the Middle East, and it's only going to come from the United States of America. But today I have to say I'm encouraged. Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham. Keep on keeping on, providing the kind of leadership that have led to this exposition you've just seen of accomplishment. God bless you. Thanks very much.